Hello everybody and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips, and I have two articles about diet I want to talk about, and I think both of them help to clear up some misunderstandings. And I'll start with the first one is about diet and diabetes and the actual causes. And the claims of carnivores and devotees of diets like the Paleo diet are always talking about how carbohydrates are bad for you. It's those people eating potatoes and beans and rice that are having all the high incidence of diabetes. You want to eat meat and dairy. Well, a study actually shows, and this isn't the first one, I've cited these types of studies before, that eating more animal protein increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, especially in obese women. The analysis was part of the EPIC study, and it included over 25,000 participants who were followed for up to 12 years. Estimated protein consumption was high. It was about 90.5 grams per day for men and 91 grams a day for women. And most of that protein was animal protein in these groups. Residents of Spain were the champions for animal protein consumption. They had the highest intake, and Germany and Sweden were the lowest protein consuming populations in the study. The researchers reported that high total protein intake was associated with a higher incidence of diabetes, and that each 10-gram increase in animal protein increased the risk by 13%. For obese women, it was far worse. It was 19% increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes for each 10-gram increase in protein. The association, by the way, was for animal protein, not plant protein, and there's an actual quote from the study that says, "Our results show that protein of animal origin is largely responsible for the association, not plant protein." So how does animal protein increase the risk of type 2 diabetes? Well, actually there are two factors. One is animal protein is calorie dense, which can cause weight gain. And I don't think many medical authorities disagree on the idea that being overweight or obese is the leading risk factor for developing type 2 diabetes. The other problem is that animal protein is accompanied by saturated fat, which is a risk factor not only for weight gain, but for fat storage. And fat storage not just on our bodies, but inside our cells. And what we know about physiology is that when too much fat gets stored inside the cells, those cells become resistant to insulin. This is why the incidence of diabetes continues to be real low in plant-eating populations and really high in westernized populations where we live on a whole lot of animal foods. So protein and fat are the problems, not carbohydrates. Sorry, all you folks still defending the paleo diet and telling people to eat animal foods. It just is not the right thing to do. All right, now the other study I want to cover, kind of related to the same issue, and I got a lot of emails about this. A new study came out showing that vegetarians have worse health outcomes than people who eat an animal foods-based diet. And so, of course, the first thing is, how can this possibly be, and what does it mean, and all that sort of thing. And the worst outcomes were things like more incidence of mental, emotional disorders, arthritis, allergies, and cancer, and even rating the quality of life as being worse for vegetarians than it is for carnivores. So I've actually had a couple people sent me an email saying, I don't eat animal food. Should I start? Is this a sign that I'm really going down the bad path, et cetera, et cetera. And of course you get emails from the people who say, I've been eating the paleo diet and I've been trying to tell you for years that it's the right thing to do. All right, so let's take a look at this study. Let's analyze it a little bit. When you do that, you get a bit of a different picture. And the details will also help you understand why every time some new study comes out, you can't go jumping off the cliff thinking that you're going to abandon all the things that you think you know about diet and health. The primary issue with this study is one that we encounter all the time when we're looking at studies showing associations between diet and health. And that is that many times you've got several groups of people whose diets aren't all that different from one another. So you're not going to see really good data showing differences in health outcomes that favor vegetarians. Now, in the case of this study, a very tiny percentage of the population in the study, of those 12,000 people, actually were consuming, or 25,000 people I guess it is, were consuming an actual vegetarian diet. 0.2% of the people identified themselves as being pure vegetarians. 0.8% identified themselves as vegetarians consuming milk and eggs. And 1.2% were vegetarians who ate dairy, eggs, and fish. Now, since it was such a tiny population, they essentially lumped all those people together and they called them vegetarians. Now, there were categories for carnivores too, 3 of them. One was carnivores eating lots of fruits and vegetables, whatever that means, carnivores eating less meat, and carnivores eating more meat. So few vegetarians, almost all of them were eating dairy and eggs, and a good percentage of them eating fish. So you don't really have much difference between the groups. If you take a look at the amount of animal food that these groups were consuming, they were about the same. And when we factor in what we know are the detrimental effects of dairy, I'm not surprised that the disease rates weren't lower for the dairy chomping vegetarians than they were for the carnivores. Another major issue with this study, and it's a problem in so many of these, is that the data were drawn from self-reported information about diet, which can be notoriously unreliable. Studies show, and I've cited several of them over the years, that people consistently underreport their consumption of bad foods and they overreport their consumption of better foods. I don't know if they're fooling themselves or trying to impress the researchers, but that's just the way it goes. Additionally, the data is cross-sectional, leading even the researchers to conclude, and I'm going to read this to you. So when you hear somebody telling you that this study shows that vegetarians are worse off, here's what the researchers actually said. In quotes, therefore, no statements can be made whether the poorer health in vegetarians in our study is caused by their dietary habits or if they consume this form of diet due to their poor health status. We cannot state whether a causal relationship exists, but describe ascertained associations. Moreover, we cannot give any information regarding the long-term consequences of consuming a special diet, nor concerning mortality rates. In other words, the study doesn't prove anything about the connection between various dietary patterns, if you could even call what I just described as varying dietary patterns, and health outcomes. On the other hand, we have a lot of evidence that shows that when there are meaningful differences in the way that people eat, a Wellness Forum style diet as compared to the standard American diet, Esselstyn compared to standard American diet, when there are meaningful differences, we have meaningful differences in the health outcomes. So again, don't jump off the cliff every time you hear about a new study. That my friend Amy Lanou in North Carolina calls it the tyranny of the latest study. People ready to jump off the cliff and do something different because one new study shows something, and half the time when you read the study, it really doesn't show that at all. All right, that's all for today. Keep eating plants. That's the message from both of today's articles. And feel free to pass this on to anybody who you think might like watching it, and I will be back to you again next week.